In this tutorial, you'll learn to create fully customizable, high-quality textures in Quixel Mixer, so let's hop right in. So let's start to really put some detail into this, but just before we start, I just want to organize the variants and colors here. So we'll just go ahead, we'll add in another group. I'm just going to call this one Armor. And then I'm just going to grab the variants and the colors and just drag it in here. Not overly important, but just sort of helps us organize everything that's contributing to the armor in one folder and have the visor in a separate one here. So let's go ahead, we'll name this new group Wear. And in this, we'll just go ahead, add a new layer. I'll just drag it in. And we'll call this one our edge wear. So we'll work straight on the edge wear. We'll start to bring this to life a little bit more, make it look a little bit more scuffed up than what it is. So let's right click, we'll go add a mask stack, and we're going to use something new. So we're going to add a curvature mask, and you can bake these out in Blender, but I just personally like working with it within Mixer because I think it handles it really well and gives us a lot of control. So instead of default curvature, we're going to use edges only here. So now we're just getting the white highlights across our model. And then we can just adjust the tightness in our levels here to just really clamp it into the edges. Because you can see here, like this part is curved, so it's sort of giving us a highlight there. So let's just bring the tightness up to around 0.4. So I'm going to go 0.442 there. And we'll adjust our levels. So I'm just going to bring this up just a smidge. And I'll just clamp this one down to just really bring out the white parts of the edges there. So just get something like this. I think that looks all right. I'll just bring this down a little bit. Just down, oops, I'm not clicking and dragging properly. 0.03, go with that. Cool. And just so we can actually see what's going on, so this looks terrible at the moment, but let's build out the material so it actually looks like we've kind of eroded some of our paint layers away. So let's go ahead with the albedo. I'm going to use a specific hex value here, so we're going to use 777 C7F, and it just sort of gives you this bluey steel sort of color. I know canonically these things are probably made out of titanium or whatever, but personally I just think this looks nice. And then the metalness, we want this to be completely white because we want it to be like this raw layer of metal beneath the paint. And then our roughness, we want something a little bit more reflective, so we'll use a value of 44. And so now you can kind of see the effect that that's taking. And just while we're here, I also just want to set up our height blending as well, because if you think about it, right, like if this has worn away a layer of paint, you'd sort of expect the fact that it would be like sort of depreciated into the rest of the helmet because the painted layer would have a little bit of thickness to it. So we'll give it a height value of negative 0.5, and we'll go wrap to underlying and we'll go 0.99. And that will be a lot more visible once we start to properly build out this mask. So coming back into the mask, speaking of, let's go ahead, we'll add a noise texture and we'll do whirly 1. And so I'm going to work with a seed of negative 55 here. Amplitude of 9.2. We'll use a frequency value here of 5, which isn't too much different from what we had in all honesty. We'll use 7 octaves just to sort of break up the edges a little bit more. The lacunarity we'll set to 3, just breaks up the profile even further. And the persistence we'll use 0.6. Cool, and so with this what we'll do is we'll change the blend type to multiply. And so now you can see how that's helping break up the edge mask there for us. And we can sort of get rid of some of like these little grey spots, because personally I don't love the way that these look. Like these little dinky bits on the edgeware. I kind of like the main edgeware layer to be very harsh and then build more on top of that. So I just want to go get rid of those. So let's add a modifier, and we'll get a brightness and contrast. And so we'll bring the brightness down a little bit, so like negative 1.6, and then the contrast will bump way up to like 7, like 7.2-ish around there. And so now you can see if we look at this, we've sort of taken away some of those more grey areas and we're just left with very harsh white parts. But at the moment I don't love the way that this is eroding because yes, it's sort of made it more harsh, but I don't like that it's also affecting our curvature map. I just want this to be affecting our noise pattern, so we'll just hold down Alt and click on the header. And you'll notice I think that gives a much nicer result because we keep more of the edgeware layer, so we have more to work with to strip back. We don't want to strip everything away at the beginning. Cool, so let's keep on building on this. So the next thing we'll do is we'll bring in an ambient occlusion map, because it doesn't really make sense that we've got edge wear tucked into the corners here, right? Like, it seems very impractical that you'd get something damaged like in here that's sort of like tucked away and hidden on the model. I think this was probably the best example here. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead, we'll bring in a texture map, and this time we'll leave it as a custom map. Okay, add image, and we'll just bring in our ambient occlusion. And this is amazing because if we change this to multiply, what we can do is we can just start to bring up the range here. And if you look at the mask, as we bring it up, it just starts to erode some of the edge wear that's closer to any of the crevices on the model. So I think somewhere around here is good because, you know, it doesn't really make sense for anything to be having edge wear up there. We just really want the edge wear to be applied to the parts of the helmet that are more exposed to the elements. And one thing I do, I don't know if it's good practice or not, but I'll generally use like soft mesh every now and then because I find it can kind of give some more interesting looks for the edge wear. Like you sort of get like this little bit here, see how it sort of like peaks up a bit because it just changes the interpretation of the normals. So every now and then I find it gives some sort of like funky designs for the edge wear, but it's really your choice if you want to have it on or off. I kind of think I might have it on because I just don't love how it's collecting at the front there. So I'm just going to turn that soft mesh on, and then we'll add one more layer here. So we'll just get a noise, and we'll set this one to simplex. We'll go with a seed of 10. I'm just going to go back to my mask viewer, or my layer viewer, sorry. We'll go with an amplitude of 6, and we'll use a frequency of 9.5. And then we'll use some octaves here to break it up at a level of 6, just so it's not so uniform. The lacunarity, we'll go with 2.7. And our persistence will go with 0.6, just to harshen that up a little bit more. And we'll change this from normal to multiply. And there we go. So now we're starting to get some nice edge wear on this. Personally, I think this is way, way too much. And I'll do some manual painting at the end, which I can show you how to do. But yeah, I personally don't love models with a whole lot of edge wear because like this thing must have been through absolute hell. When we do the Space Marine texturing, which yes is coming after this would probably be a little bit more acceptable for a Space Marine helmet, but for a Halo helmet I think it's just too much. But you know, it's personal preference, you can texture it how you want. And just looking at the edge wear here, I don't think the wrap to underlying is quite right, so I'm going to try 0.97. And there we go, that sort of adds a little bit more depth to the edges, which I think works quite nicely there. Cool. And so we can go on to building out our next map, which will be our micro scratches. Actually, sorry, just before we do continue on with the micro scratches, just with the edge wear, I'm just going to give you some exact values here. I just kind of rounded these, but I just went back and looked over my notes, and I think it does look better if we use the exact values I used here. So I'm just going to change this to 9.227. We're going to go with a frequency of 4.972. We'll use octaves at 7, we'll leave that. We'll change the lacunarity to 948, 2.948, and we'll change the persistence to 0.707. And we'll also just change the opacity of this to 0.2. And I think that just gives a nicer breakup. Like, see how we don't have that massive bit at the front there anymore? It's just sort of broken it up, it's less uniform. Yeah, sorry about that. And just to explain, normally you'd find these values by sort of like just clicking and dragging, and I think holding shift slows it a little bit as well. But I'm just going to, as you know, I'm reading off of a sheet here because this is very difficult to explain. But I just want to give you a better result, so I'll just give you the exact values that I use there. But, you know, you're also free to just muck around with these and get something you like. I just wanted to address that one there quickly. Cool. So let's go ahead. Now we'll do the micro scratches. Sorry about that. We'll add a solid layer and we'll go micro scratches here. And once again, we'll start with the actual material itself. So this one will have a height of -1, and the wrap to underlying will do as 0.97. And we'll use -1 on this one because the micro scratch is kind of in the name. It's going to be a lot smaller, so we can afford to have more indent to everything. The albedo for this one, we're just going to have 30. We're not going to have a specific color because they are smaller, so you don't really notice it all too much. Once again, the metalness will be white, as if we've cut through the paint layer. And we'll have our roughness be completely black, so it will be completely reflective. But once again, these will be smaller details, so the extreme values won't sort of show through as much. So let's go ahead, we'll add a mask stack, and we'll start with a scratched metal here. So we get a texture map, we'll go library asset this time, because it's not ambient occlusion. And we're going to look for, I'll need to filter this again, actually no, sorry, I'll go all types, I'll go imperfections, metal, and we're going to go for a scratched metal here, so I'm going to go scratched. And I want something that's relatively fine, because we are going for these micro scratches. So let's see what we can find here. That's scratched plastic, scratched painted metal. I think I'm just looking for a scratched metal. Let's try this one. I know we've used this one quite repeatedly. And let's just bring up the handle. So we'll bring this up to like 0.45. So around here. And we'll bring the other one down to about 0.5, so we'll really clamp this in. What did I say? 0.5, probably tending closer to 0.6. So we'll go about there. And we'll just add the box projection, and then I think we'll have a better idea of whether or not this is going to work nicely. So we'll box projection, we'll just tag this down, height influence at 0, radius at 1. And we'll do this at a scale of 0.8, so just a little bit smaller than usual. So I don't think this is going to work. Sorry, I'll just pick one and I'll stick with it. Go roughness. Cool, there we go. And yeah, we've got our box projection set up. So we'll start to degrade this away a bit with a bit of noise. So we'll set it to simplex. And I want this above the projection. Sorry, my bad. And we'll go with a seed of -4. This one definitely won't need to be exact because this is just a breakup mask, so it doesn't really matter how it does it. It just needs to sort of make our scratch map less uniform in its distribution. And so we'll go frequency of 11.38. I say that and then instantly put in an exact value. 5 octaves. The lacunarity will go 2.6 and persistence of 0.48. Probably could have left it at 5. It really makes no difference there, does it? Cool, and that looks terrible because we need to change the blending mode to multiply, so it's actually sort of like cutting things out a bit more. So you can see that's sort of blending everything in a bit nicer. And similar to what we did with the edgeware, I'm also going to pull in a ambient occlusion mask. So we'll go AO. We'll also set this to multiply. And once again, we're just going to drag in this range a bit just so we can sort of limit those micro scratch details just to more of the outer extremities of the helmet. So we get something a little bit more like this. So you can sort of see if we toggle between them. Actually, it's probably easier in the mask. Toggle between them, you can sort of see that we're just occluding some of those out. I kind of feel like personally this one's probably got too many scratches on it. I'm clearly very indecisive about this. Let's try this one, set it to roughness. I think this one works a little bit better, yeah, because it's meant to be micro scratches, right? So I feel like the other one was probably a little bit too prevalent. This one's nice, and I think it's got some nice little bits of detail here and there. Cool, so that sets up our micro scratches, and that means we can move on to doing some paint chips. Let's just duplicate the edgeware, because we'll use pretty similar values here. And we'll just call this one paint chips. And we'll just delete the mask stack because we'll make a new mask for the paint chips, obviously. And I don't know why I've got that open. And I think we'll just change the roughness. We'll just make it like 40. We'll just give just an ever so slightly different amount of roughness. You'll probably never be able to see it. Let's go ahead. We'll add a mask stack and we'll bring in a texture map. And we'll use a library asset this time. And we're going to look for some scratched metal. So we'll go scratched. And this one's a very easy one to spot because we want this one here. It looks very unique. It's like very much looks like chipped paint, right? And so let's set this up. So we'll change this to mask and we'll invert it so that the white parts represent our paint chips. And we'll just bring this range up just so we can start to cull out some of the smaller parts because we really just want those chip pieces to around 0.55. So around there. And once we've got this, we can just use Control and D, so we'll just duplicate it. And we want to change this one from mask to roughness, get rid of the invert, and we'll also change it to min, which at the moment won't do anything, but we'll use a tiling modifier, and we'll sort of just subtract itself from itself to get some smaller chips and some larger chips, just a bit of variation here, right? So we'll get projection, we'll just Alt and click it down, and we'll go with 2 repeats along the x-axis and 3 repeats along the y-axis, just so we displace it a little bit. And then we'll go with an offset of 0.6 along the x-axis. So I'm going to go there. And then around 0.4 on the y-axis. Something like that. So now you can see we've sort of like divided up how the paint chip's looking, and you know, we've got something that's a little bit less, you know, big and splotchy across the face of the model now. But it's still not great, and the reason I don't like it in the way it is because there's still too much variation in like the grey areas, and you know, some of the paint chips are faded. Like, I really want the paint chips to just be raw, stripped away from the paint, you know, no bleed through with the actual paint there, because it doesn't look realistic. So what we can do, first of all, let's get an ambient occlusion map in here so we can just cull it out from the areas it doesn't need to be in. So we'll bring in our ambient occlusion, set this to multiply, and we'll just crank up the range just so we're taking it out of any of the crevices, because, you know, it doesn't make sense to have paint chips in, you know, the deep crevices of the helmet once again. And then on top of that, we'll get a whirly one, or whirly, I think it's whirly. And we'll go with 78, oops, 78, 98, geez, 78, there we go, third time's a charm. We'll set this to multiply just so you can see what it's doing in real time. We'll go with an amplitude of 10, just so that it's very intense with the way it's operating. We'll set our frequency to 2, because we want to kind of cut out larger chunks of this all in one go. We'll leave the octaves at 1, the luckinarity will go to 1.5, and we'll crank the persistence all the way up just so that it's very harsh in the way it looks. So we're getting something that looks like this. Cool. And then on top of that, we'll get a gradient remap. Now, don't ask me what a gradient remap does, I just know it works. That's about it. But effectively, it's just going to help us take out any of the grey spots on these paint chips so we don't get that colour bleed like we were before. So on the range here, just instead of 0 and 1, we'll change it to 0 to 0.1. Sorry, 0.1. And now you'll notice we're just getting these nice big white splotches on the model instead. And that looks much better. And then you've got full control over, you know, how you want this mask to appear. So if you're not stoked with, like, you know, the big splotch on the back here, then you've got, you know, a few ways you can adjust it. So you can adjust like the repetitions. So, you know, you can bring these down to get a different type of blending. I might bring that back up just to make them a bit smaller again. Or, you know, change your offsets so it cuts it up a little bit differently. Just until you find something that you like, and, you know, also change your seed here with the noise. So I might just bring the offset back up. Just kind of want to move that big patch there away. Get something a little bit more like this. I'm just going to collapse some of these just so it's a bit easier to work with. Drag this down maybe. Yeah, I think something like this is nice. I'm just kind of looking to get a bit more detail at the front here. Cool, and I can sort of see this paint chip's a little bit faded, but it's not the end of the world. I might be able to maybe move it on the Y a little bit to adjust it. Just change it just so I don't see it too much. End up with something like this. Cool. So yeah, look, I think that's alright. I can always muck around with it more, give it a rotation if you wanted to really mix things up a little bit more. But yeah, so you've got a fair bit of control over how you want those paint chips to appear. And so with that, we've just got 2 more things that we need to do to complete our wear effects. We'll just do some lightening to the edges, and then we'll add a bunch of bump across the actual surface so it's not just completely flat. So we'll once again just go ahead and add in a new solid layer, and we can just call this one Edge Light. And we'll go ahead and get a mask stack, and we'll start this one out. Fortunately, this is really easy to find, so we'll go Library Asset. We're looking for a slightly grunge surface. Slightly grunge surface, and just make sure you uncheck the metal. And there's only one called slightly grunge surface, which is really handy, so you'll know you'll get the right one for this. And so we just want to isolate the white part of all of this, so let's bring our range up to 0.26. So just bring this up, just about there, and then we'll really clamp this down, so we'll bring this down to like 0.42. around there. So now we've just really isolated those white parts, and as per usual, this is just scattered a bit too large, so we'll get a projection. We'll set it to box. We'll take the height influence to 0, and we'll also change our tilt to 0, and we'll just have our radius a little bit different this time. We'll have it down near 0.3, just so we're not getting the blending so much between the different angles, because we're also going to adjust the scale to 0.1. So I'll just show you, if we have radius 1, notice that you sort of get more blending between like two different angles, whereas if we have down near 0.3, we're sort of just getting more consistency with the way that these are being projected, which I just think looks a little bit nicer here. Then we'll go ahead, we'll add in a curvature map. So we're going to use the default curvature this time. And notice how we're actually getting some of that paint chipping pulling through as well, because we're using the underlying mix, so it's nice we kind of get the different layers talking to each other and contributing to one another, which is really handy for a little bit more variety and detail here. And so we'll leave the tightness as is, but we'll just adjust the level, so we'll bring this up to like 0.57. So we'll go there, so we're really just clamping in on the edges here. And then we'll bring this down to 0.73, just around there. Cool, and we'll set this to multiply, so it's not just being applied uniformly across. And because we don't want this to be so harsh just on the edges, we kind of want a bit of spread. What we'll do is we'll go ahead, we'll add a Gaussian blur on top of this, and just make sure to alt-click this down. And it's fairly intense, so we kind of want to reduce just how strong it is, so I'm going to change this to 0.04. And so now we just sort of blow the edges out just a little bit more, so we've got a little bit more room to work with, and it's not so tightly packed onto the edges. With this though, so with this curvature, go Control D, so we're going to duplicate this, drag it above the Gaussian blur. We're going to change the type to add now, so we can actually add in a little bit more consistency along all the edges, but we're just going to bring the opacity down to 0.05, so just very low. But you'll notice what it's doing, it's just sort of brightening everything up a bit, right? And this will make a little bit more sense as we start to add in more of the layers here, especially with the next one we're about to do. So we'll get a modifier, we'll get a gradient remap. And this is really going to make this stand out quite a fair bit. It's a fairly subtle effect, so we do want it to stand out a bit more, if anything else. So we'll bring the repeat up to 2. I have no idea what the repeat does, but in this instance I know it makes everything a bit brighter. And we'll change the range from 0 to 1 to 0 to 0.27. So just around there. And so now we're getting a mask more like this. So this looks very, very chaotic. And if we look at it here, it looks terrible. But we're going to do some very, very fine levels of blending to just sort of lighten up some of the edges. But mind you, we still do have a little bit more to add to this mask. So I'm just going to collapse some of these just so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. So let's go ahead, we'll add in a noise and we'll set it to simplex, and we'll set it to multiply so we can see everything that's happening in real time. We'll go with a seed of -12, go on amplitude of 2, a frequency of 9.2, we'll have 10 octaves, so we'll just have it like really strong in the way it's going to break everything up here. The lacunarity, we'll go 1.7. And our persistence will go with 0.75. So just break everything up just a little bit, not too much. Just add a little bit more variation to everything. And then once again, much like all the other edgeware things that we're doing, we want to add in our ambient occlusion because we don't really want it occurring all too much on the inner part of the helmet. So we'll just drag this range up and we can set this to multiply. So once again, we can see it happen in real time. And so we'll just clamp this in, just until it sort of starts to erode everything away on the crevices, which is really handy for the visor brim area here. So this is still way too intense, like it kind of looks more like a concrete material now with the way we've set it up. So let's turn our attention to the actual material properties itself. So we're going to add a very, very subtle amount of height to this. In my mind, this is kind of like just a very fine layer of the paint that's been stripped away. So you can kind of see a little bit of the raw metal, but there's still like a little bits of fragments of the paint still there. So it's like a bit of a tingy sort of red going on. So we'll set that to -0.25. The Raptor underlying, we'll set this to 0.99 because, as I said, we don't want this to be overly intense, but just enough to sort of add a little bit of effect. I might even bring this down just a little bit more, 0.97 possibly. Do it like that, just get a little bit more bump in there. It'll be a little bit more apparent as we start to adjust the albedo and metalness and all that as well. Speaking of, we'll set the albedo to be a value of 60. And we'll set it to add, so we kind of want to wash the color out a little bit, which at the moment looks really intense, but we'll just bring down the opacity, so we'll just bring this down to 0.1, so we'll make it very faint, but you can just see it's sort of washing out the color a bit, so it's just kind of chipped away just a little bit, like maybe a bit of a scrape or something. And then in running with the fact that this is kind of a blend between the paint still being there and the underlying metal, we'll set our metalness value to a value of 50, so just kind of halfway between both of those values, so we get a little bit of metallic tinting on these, but not too much. And then our roughness, we definitely want this to be rougher, since it's still got the paint and sort of scratched up a bit, so we'll set this to a value of 66. And I think that looks rather nice. So if we look at this now, we're just getting a little bit more color variation on the helmet here. So if we just turn that off, you can see the impact that it's making. And it especially looks quite nice when we go and look in all the channels, you know, just adding some nice little highlights to the darker areas of the model, along the edges and everything. So all just little bit like by little bit. Like, as if we turn off the wear layer, right? This is where we started. This is where we're at. We've got one more layer of wear to go, but you can really just see how much life we've breathed into the helmet just with these little additions. So let's add in a solid layer here. And this one's going to be our surface bump. And so this is going to add like a very fine layer of bumping more or less uniformly across the helmet, because this looks good at the moment. Like, you know, we've got all that variation. We've got the wear and tear on it, but the surface is completely flat, right? Like, there's no variation along the surface, which is fine. You can definitely get away with it, but this surface bump really just brings it all together, and it's really quite amazing. I never used to do this, but I will always do this in my texturing from now on, because it's just so powerful. So let's add a mask stack here, and let's go ahead, we'll bring in a texture map, and we're going to use grunge, and I don't think the grunge map should be all too important. Oops, sorry, library asset. So we'll go grunge, because we're kind of just looking for something that's got, I kind of feel like this one, or this one, like, it's got very sort of light contrast, like just this very granular sort of look to it. So I'm going to try this. I got no idea. This one may or may not work, but we'll just see. So we'll go gloss, and we'll just drag the range up to like 0.7. Go somewhere around here. So this might be a bit too fine, in all honesty. I want, sorry, I can't English. Might want something with a little bit more to it. Let's try this. Let's start with this, and if we need to change it, we need to change it. And I'm just going to drag this up a little bit more, just crunch it down just a touch. So let's go ahead, let's duplicate this, and we'll set this to multiply, so we'll multiply it down. Yeah, I think this might be the one that I used, because that's looking a little bit closer. And then what we'll do is we'll get a projection. And typically we'd set the projection to, you know, just affect one of these, but in this instance we're just going to have it affect all of it. We're pretty much just going to take like these two being multiplied together as their own new texture. So we'll turn that on, and we'll go with a radius of 1, take the height influence away, and we'll bring the scale down to like 1.5. So yeah, now we're getting some nice sort of scattering along the helmet here. And I'm just wondering, do I want any tilt in it? Or should I just leave it as is? Any angle? Nah, I think just like that looks fine. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very fine layer anyway, so long as you have something that roughly looks like this, we're pretty good. And we're also going to add an ambient occlusion on this one. Probably, you could probably get away without using ambient occlusion here, but once again, I'm just thinking, like, you know, if this is more like surface wear sort of thing, probably not going to be all too worn up in the crevices. So we'll just set that to multiply again, and we'll just bring up our range to just sort of cull that out. This one doesn't need to be too strong like the other ones, so I can just make that a little bit finer, just so you know on the inner edges here it's not so prevalent. But at the moment this isn't actually doing anything just yet, because we still need to define our parameters. So let's change our opacity. Actually, no, we'll do that at the end so you can see the effects it's having first, and then we'll change the opacity. So we'll go height of -1, and we'll go our raptor underlying 0.95. And so there you go. So now you can see the bump that we're getting on this, but it looks a little bit too intense. So it kind of looks more like we've got like Christmas paper or like alfoil wrapped around this whole thing, so it's not looking great. And I can't remember if I already taught this and I forgot to save somewhere along the way. But anyway, this is applying to the visor. I think I did teach this, and I've just lost my ID mask, so I'm just going to bring my ID mask back onto the wear, bright green and invert, just because I don't really like the wear being applied to the visor. Sorry, I cannot remember if I already explained that. These are very difficult to record. But anyway, I digress. We'll come back here. So now we can bring down this opacity so it's just not so intense. So we'll go with an opacity level of 0.25. And I feel like that's just a good level where you just get some nice bumping along the helmet. So if you toggle it off, toggle it back on, you can just see it's a night and day difference with this becoming a much more believable looking material, which is just once again, just a very, very subtle change in everything. But we also need to make some very subtle effects here to our albedo and all that. So I'm just going to change this to a value of 42. It's very, very faint, so we don't really need to do much in the way of blending. But, you know, I think this one really helps, especially with these darker parts of the helmet. You know, it's pretty uniform color-wise, and this just sort of helps add a little bit more variation to everything, which I think is really nice. Yeah, sorry, I'll stop gawking at the materials and get on with it. And we'll change our metalness to a value of 50. So once again, it's not photorealistic or physically based, sorry, I should probably say, but I think it just makes for a fairly nice looking metalness map. You know, very, very subtle variation there. And then the last thing, we'll just change our roughness and we'll set this to a value of 23. So we just add a little bit more glossy highlight spots. And this is pretty well done, right? This is more or less the final product. There's just one thing that we're missing. Well, there's probably more than one thing, but at least for the way I know how to texture and teach it, there's one thing we're missing, and that's just some dirt build up in the corners. Because at the moment, you know, we get uniform reflectivity, more or less in the corners with the way the light picks up. You know, if this has been out in combat or whatever, even if it's been sitting on a shelf in an armory or something like that, you know, you'd expect a bit of dirt or dust build up or something of the sorts. So we'll just go ahead and we'll build that too. Unfortunately, the ambient occlusion map is perfect for doing dirt and dust build up. So fortunately, the dirt is one of the easiest things that we're going to set up here. So we're just going to add a solid layer, and we're going to add it on the outside of everything else because we want to apply this to all areas of the helmet, right? And so let's go ahead. We'll just name this dirt, and we'll add a mask stack. And we'll start this out with a curvature mask. And we're going to do this one a little bit differently. So instead of using the default curvature or edges only, we're going to use cavities only. So just to try to isolate the cavities, obviously. We'll leave the tightness at 0 and we'll bring the levels down. So we'll just bring this down to around 0.6. So just somewhere here. And then on top of this, we're also going to use our ambient occlusion as well. We're just going to use the curvature to sort of assist in the way it's working. So custom map ambient occlusion. And we'll set this one to add. And we want to invert it as well, just so that we're getting the inverse of the way the ambient occlusion has been working previously. And by a similar token, we're also going to drag this range down as well. And you can sort of see that it's just giving a little bit more bleed to the edges and where the dust or dirt can sort of accumulate. And then we can break it up a little bit with a Perlin noise texture. And so we'll set this to multiply so that we can multiply it down into what's beneath it. I'm going to go with a seed of -39. I'm going to set my amplitude to 2. My frequency to 2, octaves up to 8, the lacunarity, 2.5. I hate pronouncing that, as you've probably well aware of, and a persistence of 0.4. And then on top of this, just because this is pretty uniformly distributed, we'll get a projection map, and we'll alt-click it down onto the noise. We'll change this to box projection. So we'll go with a radius of 1, height influence of 0, and a scale of 0.1, just so it's really small and scattered across, so you can sort of see the variation that's bringing in to everything here now. And then for the last thing that we want to do, we just want one more map. So we'll go texture map, library asset, and we just want to get a grungy surface. So it's going to be one of these down here. There's 2 grungy surfaces there. There's a few more down here. I might go with this one here because I kind of like the contrast on it. And we'll change this to be overlay. We'll bring down the opacity to 0.75. We can just adjust the range a little bit, bring it up. Just make those black parts sort of cull out a little bit more. Might have to change it because I kind of feel like it's a little bit consistent. But this, like the idea of this, might bring that range up even more. The idea of this is to just kind of add like a bit of a speckled look to the dirt or dust buildup that we're getting. We also kind of like, want some uniformity in it. But by the same token, we don't exactly want it to be this prominent, so we can, change the actual material settings itself. We are going to add a height value of 3 though, like to sort of emphasize the fact that this is built up over time. And we'll just set it to 0.99, so it'll be a more intense set of bump mapping. So if I just go to my normal map, so if we just turn this off, so you can sort of see it's adding a little bit more of an intense sort of bumping there. And we'll change the albedo. So I kind of go for like a dirt build up here. So I'm going to give you an exact hex value. So we're going to go 937F66. And so this would just give us like a nice sort of browny sort of color that we can place onto everything. And we'll bring the opacity way down, so we'll go 0.1 for the opacity just because it doesn't look great at the moment. And so now, it just gives more of that sort of like dirt build up in the corners here, which personally I think looks quite nice. But, if you wanted to go for more of like a dust look, you could always take the saturation down and probably take the opacity down a little bit as well, or change the blending type so it sort of blends in with everything a little bit better. But I personally quite like this. We want our metalness to be black because this is not a metallic surface, right? And then our roughness, we'll stick this at 65 so that it's like fairly sort of non-reflective and sort of doesn't really kick much light back. And it looks really nice because it won't catch as much light in the corners and all that anymore either. So here you can see we've got very nice crisp sort of corner. Now it's not so much. And I think for all the texturing, that's about it. So the last thing we need to do here now is we need to export the textures. Actually, sorry, there is one more thing we can do before this. And I'll explain to you the process. I won't show you me doing it because it's probably a bit boring. But we can add a little bit more variation to some of these edgeware masks. Like personally, I think this is just way too much edgeware. Like for a procedural setup, it's great. But, personally, I don't love the fact that this entire segment has been worn away. I don't love this big grouping of paint chips here. I don't like the big ones on the side either. And, we could muck around with all of the mask values and all this, but it's going to end up somewhere else, right? So what we can do to have a little bit more control over it is we can do some manual hand painting of these. So I'll do it with the paint chips as an example. So if we just right click, we can add a paint mask. And to make it a little bit more interesting, so instead of like, using a circle or a square or something of sorts, like it'll work for what I want to do here because I just want to sort of paint little bits out. But if we wanted to make it more interesting, like, if we didn't want to entirely remove this and you just wanted to keep parts of it, using a square probably isn't the best way to do it. So what you can do, and unfortunately they did change the way Quixel Mixer works last year, was it, with the whole fab thing. So if you go to the online section here, and we're going to go brush types. There was one in here that I used to use and it looked really nice. just because it had some nice sort of, yeah, I think this one here, just because it's got some nice edges to it. But for some reason, and this one here, 100%, this looks great. So if you download this one off of Fab, unfortunately you can't seem to just do it straight from here, which is so frustrating. But yeah, you can use that left edge there. Actually, you know what, I'll go and download it and I'll come back so I can show you, because I do think this is rather effective to use. Alright, so I've downloaded that. They've just made that an unnecessarily painful process. I'm just going to get rid of the brush there. I'm just going to load an image from where I downloaded it. So I might go with the 4K brush, because that's what I'm texturing in. And then this is really handy. So if you press S and the middle mouse and click and drag the middle mouse button, you can adjust the scale on the fly. Just saves you from having to use the size here. And then if you use A and click the middle mouse button, you can also change the rotation. And then you can change like the size jitter, angle jitter, and flow jitter here, just so like you can break up if you're doing like a drag, how the angle and the jitter of the brush will apply, which is kind of handy if you're doing this on larger scale parts. But pretty much to try to show, I need to undo this so I can undo the erasing. To show what I want to do here, it's really powerful because if I just wanted to take away just a bit of this, and I particularly like this one just because of how inconsistent it is around the edges, you know, I can just start to sort of paint away little bit by little bit just what I want. And, you know, I can go like, oh yeah, well, you know, I much prefer that instead. So, you know, you can do this around on the paint chips and the edgeware, but I'll do this in my own personal time. I won't hold you guys up with it, but just so you know, you can do that. And I'll just show you on the edgeware just really quickly just to drive the point home. So, like, you know, as I said, wasn't a fan of this part here. So, you know, I could go ahead and be like, oh, well, you know, I'll just start to cut into this and adjust the edgeware to be a little bit more in line with what I'd like and reduce it a bit. And it's also nice because it gives you, doing hand-painted details like this, it gives you a little bit more personalization in your set of textures. So yeah, I definitely encourage going ahead and doing this at the end, just because otherwise, yeah, a completely procedural setup does look a little bit obvious, and just some little touch-ups like that are nice. But anyway, let's get this to export. So I want to check something really quickly. Let's go to our emission pass. We'll turn this on here. So this is the way it looks at the moment, and this is not great. Because this is just our primary color, and I forgot to set up a lot of the other ones. So we'll fix this up really quickly. So for our black layer here, we want the emission to be completely black, because we don't want to be able to color those areas. For the steel, same thing, we don't want to be coloring that, so we'll set that to black as well. The visor, we want the emission on this, we can set this to be completely green. So we'll drag that to green. So now when we do like a separate RGB in Blender, we can separate the primary for the color, and then we can separate the green for the visor. And then there's just another part that we need to do. We need to mask out the front part of the visor here, the visor of the lights, but then we'll also need another color, but I think we can probably pack that into an alpha channel in Blender. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another layer here. I'm just going to call this light, and I'm just going to turn off all of these apart from the albedo. I don't know why I said it so weirdly then. And we'll go add ID mask, and we'll add this to the bright cyan. And so we'll just make this white because we're going to turn this into a glass material within Blender, and then the little mesh that sits behind it will mask that out with an alpha channel so that we can have it be emissive. So we'll just go back to the emission. I just want to make sure that this is all correct. And I can't see the edgeware coming through here, so let's turn emission on for this, and we're going to set this to black because we don't want to be able to color the edgeware. We want that to remain its own unique color, even when we decide to color everything else. So we'll do that for the variance dark. Sorry, this is the variance, my bad. Why did that happen? Sorry, turn that off. I was about to say that looked very strange. We did it for the edge wear. We want to do it for the micro scratches. Sorry about that. Drag that one in. Paint chips. The edge light. I kind of feel like we can leave the edge light. Because, you know, that's sort of like distorting the hue, like shifting the hues a little bit around. So we'll go back to the emission. And the surface bump we don't need either because that's just adding bump levels to everything. Cool, so I'm just going to turn that off because now we've got a nice emission path set up that we can use as a color control map. And the last thing I want to do, because we do want to make this colorable within Blender, right? Like, you know, just having this red, it looks nice, but, you know, say you want it green or something else, it's nice to have that ability to customize it. So what I'd like to do is once you've sort of found like a color that you like, just adjust it here and just desaturate it. Just take the saturation out. And now we've got like a nice white color here that we can color within Blender, and do the same thing for the visor. Once you've found like a gold that you think looks quite nice, just take the saturation out, and now we have elements that we can color in Blender. And so there's just one final part that we want to add, because if we look at our emission map, where's it gone? Here, and turn it on. So we've got everything, and the only thing we can't see is the masks for where the actual lights should have their emission coming from. Which is this part on the texture here, so we can't see it in 3D space, obviously. So we'll just very quickly make a condition for that, and we'll have to do something a little bit different. So we'll go ahead, we'll add a solid, and let's just call this like alpha, or something like this. And we can actually turn off every single layer here, and we're not going to use emission for this one. We'll go ahead and, I can't see it, add an ID mask, and it's going to go 8, so it's that bright pink. And what we're going to do for this is we're going to, in our custom export channels, just hit this drop down, we're going to make a custom channel. So let's go add channel. I'm just going to call this alpha. It's not going to actually make an alpha channel, but we're going to set it up so that it acts as an alpha channel. Because then we should be able to, so if I press 9, I can preview this. So this effectively is an alpha channel, and we'll pack it in as an alpha channel to our color control map. Cool, so now I can see that. We'll go 3D view, and I'm just going to turn the emission off. So let's go ahead, we'll go export. So I've already set this up, but I'll show you how to set all this up. So your texture preset might be like something like metalness maps, or might be specular maps or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click advanced texture setup. And let's just go ahead, we'll just delete everything here, and we'll build this up from scratch. So we'll add a map, and let's call this one our albedo. We can do it as a JPEG, or maybe a TGA might be more lossless, lose less quality. But I'm going to go with JPEG just because it's a smaller file size. If there's something wrong with that, please tell me, but I think it should be okay for at least the albedo. And we'll set this up with our RGB channels for the albedo maps. We'll add another one, and this one we'll call our control. But we're going to pack, so into the red channel we can pack our roughness. And to the green channel, we can pack our metalness. Where's that gone? Metalness. And if you want, I normally leave the blue channel blank, but if you want to, you can go ahead and pack your ambient occlusion in there if you like to mix your ambient occlusion in with the rest of your textures. Then we'll add another one here, so we can just call this one our normal. And for this, we want to export this as a PNG, and we want to do it from 8 bits to 16 bits. With the experimenting I've done, if you don't export like this from Quixel at least, you get some really bad banding and artifacts appear on your normals, and it just sort of ruins the look of it, especially on the visor because it is a more reflective surface. So PNG in 16 bits. And then we'll go normal X, normal Y, and normal Z for our RGB channels. Now this will export it to OpenGL, which is what Blender works on. If you wanted to do it as a DirectX texture, you would just need to invert the green channel. And actually, sorry, I forgot what I was doing. So the control map, this also needs to be a PNG because we also need our alpha channel, so RGBA. I thought I was missing something. And then in our alpha channel here, we're going to go ahead and we should be able to see alpha. Here we are. So we can just pick that alpha channel and that will pack in that custom channel that we created earlier. And then we'll have our roughness, metalness, ambient occlusion, and the correct mask for our emission all in the one map. And so I'm just going to go ahead, I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to call it Blender. Save. Close that out. And then you can just go ahead, pick where you want to export it, give it a name, and hit export. And if you want to, if you were texturing in a lower resolution, say like 1K or something like that, you can always export at a higher resolution from here. So just go ahead, hit export, and then I'll see you over in Blender, and we can set this all up. And so in Blender, let's just go ahead, we'll delete everything, and let's go File, Import, and we'll bring in an FBX, because we'll just practice doing the whole thing from start to finish here. So we'll bring in our FBX file. And one thing with this, just because I did mention when we were texturing, the scale is way too large here. So I kind of find doing a scale of 0.175 works quite nicely, and I think it makes the dimensions probably still a bit too large, but you know, you think if this is fitting for a Spartan, then probably something larger than a regular human head size would probably work pretty well. And so let's go to our shading panel here, and I'm just going to switch over to cycles, and I'm going to bring in an HDRI. So let's go ahead and, where's my HDRIs? Here we are. Let's get this one because I think this looks quite nice. And I'm just going to turn my background to be transparent so we can focus on the helmet. Alright, so we can make a new helmet here. I'm just going to call it material helmet. And we'll bring in an image texture. Let's go ahead, we'll open this, and let's go to our textures, helmet, Recon helmet. Sure, this. As you can see, I've done some testing in the background. Alright, so we'll bring in our albedo, and we'll drag that into our base color. And then we can duplicate this, open up another one. Let's get our control map, and I'll show you how to set this up. So if we get a separate color node and drag this into the input, so this is technically our roughness, but the only thing we need to change is, because this is not directly affecting any color, we need to change this from sRGB to non-color, and now this is going to display correctly. So we can plug the red into our roughness, and then the green, which is our metalness, we can plug into the metallic socket, sorry. And so now this is looking better. And then we can make another image texture. We can get our normal map. We can plug that into a normal map texture, node. Plug that in there, put this in between. And this doesn't look right. Once again, we just need this to be non-color. And now we're getting all those nice crisp edges on our model. Cool. And then the last thing we need to do, because, you know, we probably don't want this to just be white, and, you know, we need different materials for the glass at the front here and the emission behind that. So what I'm going to do is let's just bring in another image, and we'll bring in our CC map, our color control. And if we try to look at it, you can't see anything. It's completely black, and that's because it has an alpha channel on it. So what we can do quite nicely is just in this alpha socket here, instead of straight, we can go channel packed. And so now we can actually see our color control mask coming through here. And so we can use a separate color node. And in this instance, we actually do want to keep it as a color because we directly want to use the colors from the texture. And so we can use the red channel to color in our primary color here. So let's go ahead, let's search for a mixed color. Sorry, I think it's, what is it? It's a color, no, mix color, there it is. Sorry about that. And we'll drag the red into the factor. And then we just want to change this from mix to multiply. And now we have full control over the color of our helmet. So we can pick it to be absolutely whatever we want it to be. And as you can see, that very nicely gets all of the edgeware masked out, so we're not coloring any of that. And then the next hurdle here is we need to get our visor to be masked out as well, which, as we know, we've controlled with the green channel. And so you've got two options here. So we can just do like a single tone color visor. So we can just duplicate that multiply node, chuck it after the first one. We can use the green channel here. And then, you know, you can multiply a color into your visor if you want. And that's a pretty simple setup. And I've just got some lights here that I had from a previous scene, so I'm just going to enable those because they look quite nice. And, you know, this is fine. And if you want to keep it simple, then this totally works. Personally, I kind of like having two-toned visors in my setups. So what I'm going to show you to do here is we're just going to do a very quick and simple little node setup. So So let's get a layer weight node. So I'll bring this in, and then we'll get a math node, and we'll set this to power, and we'll have the exponent at a value of 2, and we'll plug the facing value into the base. And so this just gives us a funky sort of looking Fresnel look here. And then what we can do with this is, well, I mean, if you want to, you can just put it into a node group so it's a little bit more organized. So I've just got this single one here, and then we can control the blending factor there. What we can do with this is we can go ahead and grab another math node. We've got math, and we'll put it between our green input to the factorial. Let me bring this up. And let's change this to multiply, and we'll multiply our node group with the green channel. So this will just isolate this Fresnel or layer weight effect just to be on the visor. And then let's keep this multiply node here. We'll duplicate it again, we'll just drag it down. And then we can so I've got both of these multiply nodes coming into this third one that's currently a multiply node. We're going to change it to mix. Right, and then we can use the green output, plug it into the factorial, and that won't work at the moment, sorry. We just need to flip the input to this, so we need the primary colors to be in the A socket, and we need the visor to be in the bottom socket, because in Blender, whatever's in the bottom socket is on top. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's just the way it is. And now what we can do is we can make a two-toned visor. So we can have two colors in here. And actually, sorry, if we change this to mix, it kind of makes the two-tone look a little bit better. And generally, I find a blend value of like 0.95 kind of looks a lot better. And so then we can go ahead and kind of, like if I'm doing a gold one, I kind of like to have it more saturated on the outside and just a little bit whiter or lighter on the inside, sorry. Which probably doesn't show off too well here. But then, you know, if you wanted to go for something more funky, you know, you can do something like this as well. And this is personally just a look that I really like on the visors. I think it just adds a little bit more detail and gives it a bit of a funkier look. And then the final part that we're going for here is we just need to mask out these bits at the front to be glass. So what we'll do is we'll go get a mix shader, plug this in here, and we'll use the blue channel output from our CC mask, and we'll have that control the mix shader. We'll get a glass shader, and we can just plug that into the bottom here. Now, it's not going to make too much of a difference that we use glass here. It gives a slightly more realistic look, in my opinion. You could probably get away with using a transparency shader there, though. And we'll also just plug the normal into the bottom input here. And for the hell of it, we'll plug the albedo into the color. Cool, and so we can't see anything just yet. So the next thing we can do is just in this emission drop down here, for the principled shader, what you can do is if we get the alpha channel of our helmet, and let's go ahead, let's plug that into the color. And so now if we preview this, we can start to bump up this strength, and now we're actually getting some emission pouring into here. So generally I find like a value of 12 works pretty well. And just a plain value of white, I think for the lights on the front of a helmet works fine. But if for whatever reason you want it to be a bit more creative and change the color of these, we do have full customization over this because it's our own asset after all. So, you know, you could also go ahead and multiply some other color into it if you wanted to, but I'm just going to leave that as white. And there you have it. That's the complete setup for our Recon helmet, completely in Blender. You've made this from start to finish. You should be very proud of the work you've done. And you have something that's completely customizable as well, so it's completely colorable, so it can suit whatever need you want. And anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed. I will be doing the Space Marine texturing tutorial series next, and then I will be revisiting the Mark 6 Gen 3 helmet series, but it is going to be a million times better than the first one in quality, and it's going to feature a much larger part of the modelling process as well, which I'm very excited to show and teach everybody. So anyway guys, I will see you all in the next one.